Unlock the hidden patterns shaping your thoughts, reactions, and emotional cycles, and discover how shadow work transforms self-awareness into real life lasting change. In this powerful deep dive, you'll uncover what your shadow actually is, why certain triggers feel so intense, and how unconscious patterns have been influencing your behaviors. Unlock the hidden patterns shaping your thoughts, reactions, and emotional cycles, and discover how shadow work transforms self-awareness into real, lasting change. In this powerful deep dive, you'll uncover what your shadow actually is, why certain triggers feel so intense, and how unconscious patterns have been influencing your behavior, relationships, and sense of self. This experience breaks down shadow work into something clear, grounded, and actionable, revealing how suppressed emotions, learned responses, and identity conditioning continue to show up in your daily lives. As you move through this process, you'll learn how to recognize real triggers in real time, understand the root of emotional reactions, and shift from automatic responses into intentional awareness. This is not about fixing yourself. It's about integrating the part of you that has been unseen so you can move through life with more clarity, stability, and control over your state. If you've ever felt stuck in repeating patterns, overwhelmed by your emotions, reactions, or aware that there's more beneath the surface, this is where you begin to understand it. The key takeaways in this process: what shadow work really is and how it forms over time, how triggers, projections, and patterns reveal unconscious behaviors, why emotional reactions feel intense and hard to control, the step-by-step process to work through your shadow in real time, how to move from reaction to awareness and intentional response, understanding resistance, avoidance, and emotional blocks, integrating your shadow to create clarity, alignment, and personal growth. If the idea of shadow work caught your attention, there's usually a reason, because some people don't just randomly feel drawn to that word. There's something about it that feels familiar, even if you can't fully explain why. Maybe you've had moments where your reactions didn't make sense to you. You said something, did something, felt something, and afterwards thought, why did I respond like that? Maybe you've noticed patterns that keep repeating. The same type of situations, the same kind of conflict, the same emotional cycle. Just with different people, different environments, different timing. And even when you recognize it, it still shows up. Or maybe it's more internal, moments where you feel triggered, but the intensity doesn't match what's happening in front of you. Moments where something small feels big, or something minor stays with you longer than it should. And part of you knows there's something deeper underneath it, something that isn't just about the present moment. And then there's another layer, the parts of yourself you don't allow others to see, you don't always show, the thoughts you don't always say out loud, the emotions you've learned to manage, hide, or push to the side. Not because they're not there, but because they don't always feel acceptable. So you keep certain part of yourself under control, contained, filtered, and over time, that becomes automatic. You learn who to be in different environments, You learn what's okay to express and what's better to keep to yourself. And from the outside, everything can look fine, but internally, there's more going on. And if you've ever felt like there's a part of you that don't fully align, parts that feel confident, clear, and grounded, and other parts that feel reactive, uncertain, and heavy, that's not inconsistency. That's contrast. That's different aspects of you operating at the same time. And most people are only familiar with the parts they've learned to identify with, the parts that feel acceptable, the parts that feel in control. But there's other parts that don't get as much attention, not because they're not important, but because they're uncomfortable. And this is where the idea of shadow comes in. It's not something negative. It's not something to be afraid of, but as the parts of yourself that haven't fully been seen, fully understood, fully integrated. Your shadow isn't just the things you don't like about yourself. It's also the parts of you that were never fully expressed, the emotions you were taught to suppress, the traits you learned to hold back, the reactions that developed as a way of protection at some point, but don't always serve you now. And what makes it interesting is that your shadow doesn't disappear just because you don't look at it. It shows up in indirect ways, in your triggers, in your patterns, in the things that bother you about other people, in the moments where your reaction feels stronger than the situation. Some people feel drawn to this shadow work. It's usually because on some level, they've started to notice that they've started to realize there's more influencing them than they're consciously choosing. And they don't want to keep reacting the same way. They don't want to keep repeating the same cycles. They want to understand what's actually underneath it, not to judge it, not to label it, but to see it clearly. Because once you can see something clearly, it stops controlling you in the same way. And this is where shadow work shifts from something abstract into something very real. It becomes the process of understanding yourself more completely, not just the parts that you easily accept, but the parts that require more awareness, more honesty, more depth. And once you begin to approach it that way, you start to realize something important. The parts of you that felt the most confusing and often hold the most information, the parts that feel the most reactive, are usually connected to something unresolved. And the parts that feel the most hidden are often the ones that once understood. Create the biggest shift in how you're experiencing life and yourself. So this isn't fixing yourself. This isn't about trying to be someone else. It's about understanding what's already there in a way that actually brings clarity. Because when you understand it, you don't just react to it anymore. You start to work with it, and that changes everything. So when we talk about the shadow, let's bring it into clarity in a way that actually makes sense. Because a lot of people hear that word and immediately associate it with something dark, negative, or something they need to get rid of. But that's not what it is. Your shadow is not a separate part of you. It's not something outside of you. It's not something you need to fight. Your shadow is simply something within you that exists, but is not fully in your conscious awareness. And the parts of you that were pushed out are focused over time. This doesn't happen randomly. It develops through experience, From a very early point in life, you start learning what is acceptable and what isn't, what gets approval, what gets corrected, what gets ignored. And based on that, you begin to shape how you show up. Certain emotions feel safe to express, others don't. Certain traits are encouraged, others are discouraged. So you adapt. You emphasize certain parts of yourself and you minimize others. Not consciously at first, it just happens. And over time, the parts that don't get expressed don't disappear, they get stored. They move out of your direct awareness. They still influence how you feel, how you react, how you interpret situations. And this is where your shadow lives, not in something mysterious, but in the parts of you that were never fully processed, expressed, or understood. Some of those parts may be emotional. Frustration you learned to suppress. Sadness you didn't have space for. Anger that didn't feel safe to express. Some of those parts may be behavioral. Ways of speaking, ways of asserting yourself, ways of setting boundaries that you learned to hold back. And some of those parts are not what you'd expect, because your shadow, it doesn't only hold what you consider negative, it also holds what you never allowed yourself to fully step into. Confidence, directness, creativity, visibility. If at some point those things didn't feel safe or didn't feel accepted, they can move into the background too. So your shadow isn't just what you avoid, it's also what you haven't fully claimed. And because it sits outside of your direct awareness, it expresses itself indirectly through patterns, through reactions, through moments where your response feels automatic. You don't stop and think, you just react. And afterward, you might question it, you might reflect on it, but in the moment, it felt immediate. That's the shadow influencing your response, not in a way that's separate from you, but in a way that hasn't fully seen you yet. And this is why certain situations feel more intense than others, because they're not just about what's happening now. They're activating something that already exists beneath the surface, something familiar, something stored. And once that gets activated, your state shifts quickly, your perception narrows, your behavior follows, and it can feel like it came out of nowhere, but it didn't. It came from something that's been there, unseen but active. Now here's where this becomes important. Your shadow is not something that needs to be removed. It's something that needs to be understood, because when something is unconscious, it influences you without you realizing it. But when something becomes conscious, you gain awareness of it, and awareness changes your relationship with it. You don't lose the part of yourself. You gain the ability to recognize it, to pause. You can choose how to respond instead of reacting automatically. And that's where the shift begins. Not in controlling yourself, but in understanding what's actually happening. So instead of asking, what did I react to exactly? Why did I react like that? And frustration. You start asking with curiosity, what part of me is being activated right now? What does this connect to? What am I actually feeling underneath this? And those questions begin to bring something into awareness that wasn't clear before. And once it becomes clear, it stops feeling random. It starts to make sense. And when something makes sense, you can work with it instead of being pulled by it. And this is where shadow work becomes something very real. Not a concept, not a label, but a process of becoming aware of what's been influencing you. So you can start responding with intention. And once you begin to see those patterns, you'll notice something. They show up in specific ways, consistently, in your triggers, and your reactions, and the things that stand out to you about other people. And once you learn how to recognize those patterns, you start to see your shadow more clearly, not as something hidden, but as something expressing itself in real time. And that's where the next step begins, how your shadow work shows up. So once you understand that your shadow is simply what's outside of your conscious awareness, the next step is recognizing how it actually shows up in your day-to-day life. Because it's not hidden in some distant place. It's active. It expresses itself in real time. And once you know what to look for, you start seeing it everywhere. The first way your shadow shows up is through triggers. A trigger is any moment where your emotional reaction feels stronger than the situation in front of you. Something small happens, but your reaction feels big, immediate, intense, and often automatic. You don't stop to think, you just feel it. Frustration, irritation, defensiveness, withdrawal, and in that moment it feels justified. It feels like it's about what's happening right now, but usually there's something underneath it, something that the situation is activating, a memory, a pattern, an emotion that hasn't fully processed, and the situation becomes the outlet for that response. The second way your shadow shows up is through projections. This is one of the most revealing patterns because what you strongly react to in other people often reflects something within you. Not always in an obvious way, but in a way that's connected. If someone's behavior consistently irritates you, if a certain trait stands out to you quickly, if you find yourself judging or reacting to something repeatedly, that's worth paying attention to. Because projection isn't about blaming yourself. It's about recognizing that your perception is highlighting something. Sometimes it's something you've suppressed. Sometimes it's something you've experienced before. Sometimes it's a trait you haven't allowed yourself to express, but either way, your reaction is giving you information. The third way your shadow shows up is through patterns, repetitive situations, repetitive dynamics, repetitive emotional cycles. You may notice that certain types of experiences show up in your life. Different people, similar outcomes, different environments, but similar feelings. And at some point, you start to recognize it's not random. There's a pattern, and patterns are not there to frustrate you. They're there to show you something. They're consistent because something within you is consistent. A belief, a response, a way of interpreting situations. And until that becomes conscious, the patterns repeat. The fourth way your shadow shows up is through automatic reaction. Moments where you respond before you think. You say something quickly. You shut down. You become defensive. You avoid. You over-explain. You pull back. And afterwards, you may reflect on it. You may realize you could have responded differently, but in the moment, it felt immediate. That's because the response didn't come from your conscious awareness. It came from something already stored, something similar, something practiced over time, familiar. And that's important to recognize because it means your reactions are not random, they're conditioned. And what's conditioned can be understood. The fifth way your shadow shows up is through internal conflict. This is where you feel two opposing parts of yourself at the same time. One part of you wants to move forward. Another part hesitates. One part of you feels confident. Another questions it. One part of you wants to express something. Another part holds back. And that tension can feel confusing because it feels like inconsistency. But it's not inconsistency. It's multiple aspects of you operating at once. One part that's familiar, one part that's evolving, and the shadow often holds that part that haven't fully been understood yet. So they show up as resistance, as hesitation, as second guessing, not to stop you, but because they haven't been integrated yet. And once you start seeing all of this, triggers, projections, patterns, reactions, internal conflict, you realize something important. Your shadow is not hiding. It's expressing itself consistently in ways that are observable, in ways that give you information. And once you can recognize those signals, you stop seeing your reaction as something to judge and start seeing them as something to understand. Because every trigger points to something. Every pattern reflects something. Every reaction connects something. And instead of pushing it away, you can start looking at it directly, with awareness, with curiosity, without immediately labeling it as something good or bad. And that shift alone changes how you experience yourself. Because now, instead of being caught in the reaction, you're observing it, and that space between what happens and how you respond. That's where your power is. That's where things begin to change. Because once you can see it in real time, you're no longer completely identified with it. You're aware of it, and awareness is the first step. But it's not the only step. Because once you recognize your shadow, the next question becomes, what do you actually do with it? How do you work with something that you're just starting to become aware of? How do you move from observation to understanding to integration? And that's where the process deepens. Once you understand that your shadow is simply what's outside of your conscious awareness, the next step is recognizing how to actually, how it shows up in your daily life. Because it's not hidden in some distant place. It's active. It expresses itself in real time. And once you know what to look for, you start seeing it everywhere. The first way your shadow shows up is through triggers. A trigger is any moment where your emotional reaction feels strong and stronger than the situation in front of you. Kind of like this person in my chat. Something small happens, but your response feels big, immediate, intense, and often automatic. You don't stop to think. It just feels. It could be frustration, like little baby is a little irritated by these graphics and is defensive, right? Withdrawal, and in that moment, it feels justified. It feels it's about what's happening right now, like this outfit is really the problem. But usually, there's something underneath it, something that the situation is activating, a memory, a pattern, an emotion that hasn't fully been processed, and the situation becomes the outlet for that response. The second way your shadow shows up is through projection. This is one of the most revealing patterns because what you strongly react to in other people often reflects something within you. Not always in an obvious way, but in a way that's connected. If someone's behavior consistently irritates you, if a certain trait stands out to you quickly, if you find yourself judging or reacting to something repeatedly, that's worth paying attention to. Because projection isn't about blaming yourself. It's about recognizing that your perception is highlighting something. Sometimes it's something you've suppressed. Sometimes it's something you've experienced before. Sometimes it's a trait you haven't allowed yourself to express. But either way, your reaction is giving you information. How do you move from observation to understanding to integration? You're no longer completely identified with it. You're aware of it. And awareness is the first step. That's where the power is between what happens and how you respond. So once you begin recognizing your shadow and it shows up, The next layer is understanding why certain patterns feel so strong, because not every reaction feels the same. Some moments pass quickly, and others feel intense, sticky, hard to move out of, and that's not random. That intensity is connected to how the shadow was formed, because the shadow isn't built all at once. It develops over time, through repetition, through experience, and through the amazing meaning that you give those experiences. At different points in your life, you'll encounter situations where you had to adapt, situations where expressing something fully didn't feel safe, or didn't feel accepted, or didn't get the response it needed. So instead of processing it completely, you adjusted. You held something back. You redirected how you expressed yourself, and that adjustment helped you at that time. I see this happen a lot with creators, artists, and entertainers, and even myself. Being from certain communities, if you feel you have to protect or defend yourself, or create like an alter ego to make you feel more comfortable in some environments, it allows you to navigate situations, to maintain a connection, to avoid conflict, or to stay in control. But what wasn't fully processed didn't disappear. It stayed. And over time, those unprocessed experiences began to form patterns. Patterns in how you respond, patterns in how you interpret things, patterns in how you protect yourself, and eventually those patterns become parts of your identity. Usually things that are pointed out by significant others, family members, and friends. Not because they define you, but because they've been repeated enough times to feel familiar. So when something in the present moment activates that pattern, your response feels immediate, strong, automatic, but it doesn't just feel like it's about what's happening now. It's connected to something that reinforces that pattern from before. And this is why certain triggers feel deeper than others, because they're linked to something that has history behind it, something that's been experienced, and that does include past life experiences, reinforced and stored. And once something is stored like that, your system recognizes it quickly. Even before you consciously think about it, your body responds, your mind interprets, your state shifts. When we say state, it's kind of like your way of being, your feeling, your mood in the moment. Many cultures have expressed post-traumatic stress disorders with authority figures because of past experience from their ancestors, and may not have had those experiences in real time, but naturally or through conditioning have the same states of shift when in an environment, all in a matter of seconds. And that's why it can feel overwhelming at times, because it feels like it happens so fast. But when you slow it down, you start to see the sequence. Something happens externally, your system recognizes something familiar, your body reacts, your thoughts begin to form around that reaction, and then your behavior follows. And all of that happens before you fully had a chance to step back and observe it. And this is where identity plays a role, because the more a pattern repeats, the more it starts to feel like this is just who I am. I'm just someone who reacts this way. I've always been like this. This is how I handle things. And when something becomes part of your identity, you stop questioning it. You stop observing it. You accept it as fixed. Your patterns are learned. They're reinforced. They're practiced. But they are not fixed. They feel strong because they've been repeated, much like a parent-child situation. The pattern repeats. It is picked up and not always identified as similar by the child. They feel automatic because they've been practiced or overly observed. They feel personal because they've been experienced over time. But they can be understood. And once something is understood, it can be worked with, not by forcing change, but by bringing awareness to what's happening underneath. Because when you understand the origin of a pattern, it changes how you relate it. Instead of reacting to it as if it's happening for the first time, you start recognizing it. You see the familiar response. You notice the shape in your state. You become aware of the thoughts that follow. And that awareness begins to slow the process down. It creates space. And that space is where something new becomes possible. Because now you're not just reacting, you're observing to the reaction. And once you can observe something, you can start to understand it more deeply. Not just what it is, but where it came from, what it's connected to, what it was originally trying to do for you, because most of these patterns didn't form randomly. They formed as a response, as a way to navigate something, as a way to protect something. And when you see that clearly, you stop approaching your shadow with frustration and start approaching it with understanding. Because now you're not asking, how did I get, or how do I get rid of this? You're asking, what is this connected to? What part of me developed this? What was it trying to do? And those questions become the shift of everything. Because now you're not fighting the pattern. You're learning from it. And that's where the process moves deeper. Because once you understand how your shadow formed, the next step is learning how to actually work with it in real time. Not just noticing it, but engaging with it in a way that leads to integration. And that's where the real shift begins. So now that you can recognize your shadow and understand how it formed, the next step is learning how to actually work with it. Because awareness on its own is powerful. But what do you do with that awareness? Is create change. And this is where most people either go deeper or go back into old patterns. Because when something gets activated in real time, it doesn't always feel calm. It doesn't always feel clear. It can feel fast, emotional, intense. So the process has to be simple enough to access in that moment, but deep enough to actually create understanding. The first step is recognition. You notice that something has been activated. Not later, not after everything has already played out, but as it's happening. You feel the shift in your body. You notice the change in your thoughts. You recognize that your actions or reactions is stronger than usual. And instead of immediately acting on it, you pause. Even briefly, that pause matters because it separates you from the automatic response. It gives you just enough space to observe. The second step is naming the experience, not analyzing it yet, just identifying it. What am I actually feeling right now? Frustration, defensiveness, anxiety, discomfort. And as simple as that sounds, naming it brings it into awareness. It moves it from something reactive to something observable. The third step is tracing it back. This is where you begin to go underneath the surface. You ask, what does this remind me of? Where have I felt this before? Is this about what's happening right now, or does it feel familiar? And you don't force an answer. You allow whatever comes up, because often the feeling itself will point you in the right direction. It will connect to something, a pattern, a past experience, a repeated dynamic, and even if you don't get a clear memory, you start to recognize that this reaction has depth. It's not just about the present moment. The fourth step is understanding the purpose. This is where the shift happens. Because instead of seeing the reaction as something negative, you start asking, what is this response trying to do for me? Is it trying to protect me? Is it trying to keep me in control? Is it trying to avoid something? And when you look at it this way, you start to see that even the reactions you don't like have a function. They developed for a reason. At some point, they made sense. They helped you navigate something, and recognizing that removes the immediate resistance. It replaces judgment with understanding. The fifth step is allowing the emotion without reaction from it. This is what people often try to skip ahead. They try to get rid of the feeling, but the shift doesn't come from pushing it away. It comes from allowing it to be there without letting it control your behavior. You let yourself feel it without immediately acting on it, without suppressing it, without needing it to disappear right away. And what you'll notice is when you stop resisting it, it begins to move. It doesn't stay as intense. It shifts because it's no longer being reinforced by reaction or suppression. The sixth step is choosing your response. Now that you've created space, now that you understand what's happening, you have a choice. Instead of reacting automatically, you respond intentionally. You decide what aligns with you and who you want to be in that moment. Not what feels immediate, but what feels grounded. And this doesn't mean you ignore what you felt. It means you respond from awareness instead of from impulse. And the more you do this, the more that becomes your default. The seventh step is reflection afterward. After the moment has passed, you take a step back and look at it more clearly. What triggered it? What did it connect to? How did you respond? What did you learn from it? And this reinforces the process because now you're not just experiencing the pattern, you understand it. And each time you go through this, something shifts, not all at once, but gradually. You become more aware, more quickly. You create space more easily. You respond with more intention. And over time, the intensity of certain reactions begins to decrease. Not because you forced them away, but because you've understood them. You've brought them into awareness. You've stopped letting them operate unconsciously, and that's what integration is all about. It's not about removing parts of yourself. It's understanding them enough that they no longer control you in the same way. And once you start working with your shadow like this, you begin to notice something. You don't feel as reactive. You don't feel as pulled into the same patterns. You don't feel conflicted internally because the parts of you that once felt separate are starting to come into alignment. That creates a different experience, a more stable one, a more clear one, a more intentional one. But there's another layer to this, because as you start doing this work, you may notice resistance, moments where you don't want to look deeper, moments where it feels easier to avoid, and that resistance is part of the process too. So the next step is understanding how to move through that. As you begin working with your shadow, you'll notice something almost immediately. There are moments where it feels clear, where you're aware, where you can observe and understand what's happening. And then there are moments where you don't want to look at it at all. Moments where you feel resistance, where it's easier to distract yourself, to move on quickly, to tell yourself it's not that deep, or to shift your focus somewhere else. And that's not a failure in the process. That is the process, because resistance is part of your shadow too. It's not separate from it. It's one of the ways it protects itself from being seen. Because from your system's perspective, what's familiar feels safe, even if it's not aligned, even if it's limiting. It's known. So when you start bringing awareness to patterns that have been operating automatically, there's a natural pushback, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're stepping outside of what's being enforced or reinforced, and that can feel uncomfortable. It can feel unfamiliar. It can feel like you'd rather not go there at all. And that shows up in different ways. Sometimes it shows up as avoidance. You recognize something, but you don't follow it further. You keep things on the surface. You move on before going deeper. Sometimes it shows up in a rationalizing way. You explain the behavior. You justify the reaction. You make it make sense in a way that doesn't require you to look underneath it. And sometimes it shows up as a distraction. You shift your attention quickly. You fill your time. You keep your mind occupied so you don't have to sit with what's coming up. And all of these are ways your system maintains familiarity. But once you start recognizing resistance, it changes how you relate to it. Because instead of seeing it as something that's stopping you, you start seeing it as information. You start asking, what am I avoiding right now? What feels uncomfortable about looking at this? What part of this am I not ready to see yet? And again, you're not forcing anything. You're not pushing yourself beyond what you can handle. You're simply becoming aware of the resistance itself, because resistance is not random. It's connected to something. It's pointing to something that feels unfamiliar or uncertain or not fully understood yet. And when you approach it with awareness instead of judgment, it starts to shift, because you're no longer trying to push past it. You're working with it. You're allowing yourself to move at a pace that will create understanding. And this is where patience becomes important, because shadow work is not something you complete quickly. It's something you push through. It's a process, and it's not something you rush. The depth of the process depends on your willingness to stay present with it, not perfectly, but consistently, even in small ways, even in brief moments of awareness, because those moments build. They create a different relationship with yourself, and where you're not avoiding what's there, but gradually understanding it. And over time, what once felt uncomfortable starts to feel familiar, not because the content has changed completely, but because your relationship to it has. You're no longer reacting to it the same way. You're not as resistant to seeing it. You're more open to understanding it. And that's openness. That allows integration to happen. Integration doesn't come from forcing change. It comes from understanding something fully enough. That is naturally a shift. And once you move through that resistance, you start to experience something different. More clarity, less internal conflict, more stability in how you feel and respond. And that leads into the final piece of this. Because you consistently work with your shadow, something begins to change in a deeper way, not just in how you react, but how you experience yourself. As you continue working with your shadow, something begins to shift, and it goes beyond individual reaction. It's not just about handling triggers better. It's not just about understanding patterns. It starts to change how you experience yourself as a whole. Because when parts of you that were unconscious start to come out into awareness, they don't feel separate anymore. They start to integrate. And integration simply means this: the parts of you that once felt conflicting starts to feel aligned. The reaction that once felt automatic start to feel optional. The patterns that once felt repetitive start to lose their intensity, not because you forced them, but because you've understood them. And once something is fully understood, it doesn't operate in the same way. You're no longer reacting from it. You're aware of it. You can see it. You can feel it, but it doesn't control your behavior the way it should. And that creates a different internal experience, a more stable one, a more grounded one, a more clear one, because now you're not trying to manage parts of yourself. You're working with all of them. And that removes a lot of internal tension. The tension between who you feel like you should be and what you're actually experiencing. The tension between what you express and what you hold back. The tension between clarity and confusion. And as that tension decreases, something else increases. Your sense of direction, because when you're not pulled in a different direction internally, your decisions become clearer. Your responses become more consistent. Your actions begin to align more naturally with who you are, and that's where identity shifts start. Not in a forced way, not in a way where you're trying to become someone new, but in a way where you're being more of who you already are, without the distortion of unexamined patterns. And that's a very different experience, because now you're not second guessing yourself as much. You're not reacting from old conditioning in the same way. You're not repeating the same cycles without awareness. You're moving with intention, with understanding, with clarity, and that affects everything. How you communicate, how you show up in relationships, how you make decisions, how you handle challenges, because your response is no longer coming from some unconscious place. It's coming from awareness, and that creates consistency, not perfection, but consistency. And that's what allows real change to hold, because it's not based on temporary motivation. It's based on understanding. And when understanding becomes consistent, your state becomes more stable. Your perception becomes clearer. Your behavior aligns more naturally. And you begin to experience yourself differently. Not as someone trying to figure out, but as someone who understands how to work with what's there. And from that place, growth doesn't feel forced. It feels more natural. It feels like a continuation, like you're building on something that already makes sense. And this is where a lot of people begin to feel that shift. They move from reacting to themselves to understanding themselves, from questioning everything to seeing patterns clearly, from feeling disconnected to feeling aligned. And once you experience that, You don't just temporarily have clarity or want it. You want depth. You want consistency. You want to continue developing that awareness in a way that actually supports your life. Because now you've seen what's possible, not a theory, but in your own experience. And when that happens, something naturally opens up, a curiosity to go further, to understand more, to refine what you've already started to see. Because this isn't about fixing yourself. It's about understanding something fully enough that you can move forward without being pulled back by what was once unseen. And once you begin operating from that place, you'll notice something. The same patterns that once felt frustrating start to feel informative. The same reactions that once felt overwhelming start to feel manageable. And the same parts of yourself that felt hidden, they start to feel integrated. And that's the shift. Not into something new, but into something clear, something grounded, something that allows you to move forward with awareness, with intention, and with a deeper understanding of yourself than you've ever had before. A lot of people find themselves drawn to manifestation. There's a good chance it's because some part of you already feels that your thoughts, emotions, and internal state affect your reality. Most people can feel that intuitively. They've experienced moments where everything seemed aligned, where opportunities appeared at the right time, where their mindset shifted and suddenly their life started moving differently. And then they've experienced the opposite. Moments where they tried to think positively, tried the visualization, tried to believe, but nothing really changed. Or maybe things changed temporarily, and then something slowly returned back to the same pattern. The same emotional cycles, the same obstacles, the same frustrations. And after a while, people start asking themselves, if manifestation is even real, why does it feel inconsistent? Why do I feel aligned one moment and blocked the next? Why do I keep attracting the same situations, even when I'm trying to change? And this is where most people miss something important. Manifestation is not just about what you consciously want. It's also connected to what's happening underneath your awareness, your subconscious patterns, your emotional conditioning, your identity, your unresolved fears. Because no matter what you say, you want consciously, your deeper patterns still influence your state, and your state influences your behavior, perception, and decisions you make every single day. So if part of you desires growth, but another part of you fears change, you create internal conflict. If one part of you wants abundance, but another part associates visibility, success, or receiving with discomfort, that conflict affects your actions. If you consciously want healthy relationships, but subconsciously you expect abandonment, rejection, inconsistency, or instability, you'll often repeat familiar emotional dynamics without realizing it. And this is why shadow work becomes necessary before manifestation becomes consistent. Because your shadow contains the hidden patterns influencing your reality from underneath the surface. Not because the universe is punishing you, not because you're blocked, but because unresolved patterns continue to shape your emotional baseline, your reaction, your expectations, and what feels familiar to your nervous system. Most people try to manifest externally without first understanding what's happening internally. So they focus only on vision boards, affirmations, positive thinking, while ignoring the deeper emotional patterns that continue pulling them back into the same states. And eventually they become frustrated because consciously they're moving in one direction, but subconsciously part of them is still attached to the old pattern, and that creates resistance. Not resistance from outside of you, resistance within you. And once you begin understanding that, manifestation starts making much more sense. Because now it's no longer about pretending to feel positive all the time. It's about alignment. It's about becoming aware of unconscious patterns shaping your state, because your external reality is influenced by how you consistently think, feel, perceive, and respond. And if those patterns remain unconscious, you may continue recreating familiar experiences without realizing it. This is why people often attract what feels emotionally familiar, even when consciously they want something different, because familiarity feels safe to the neurological system or nervous system, even if it's limiting, even if it creates suffering. And this is where shadow work changes everything, because shadow work brings awareness to the patterns underneath the surface, the fears you don't fully acknowledge, the beliefs you inherited, the emotional responses you learned over time, the parts of yourself that still expect certain outcomes because of past experiences. And once those become conscious, you start operating from them automatically. You begin responding intentionally instead of unconsciously. And that's when manifestation shifts from fantasy into something grounded and real. Because now your internal state starts becoming aligned with what you consciously desire. Not perfectly overnight, but consistently. And consistency changes everything, because manifestation is not just about what you desire occasionally, it's about the state you return to repeatedly. It's about what feels believable, safe, aligned, and possible. And if your subconscious patterns are working against your conscious goals, you'll feel that conflict constantly. But once you begin doing shadow work, you start removing internal resistance. You start understanding why certain patterns repeat, why certain fears show up, why certain emotional cycles continue. And instead of fighting yourself, you begin working with yourself. And that changes your relationship to manifestation completely. Because now, you're not just chasing outcomes, you're transforming the internal patterns shaping the outcomes. And that's where, of course, I'm going to say, the shift begins. Now that we've established why shadow work matters, we need to understand what manifestation actually is, because most people have been introduced to manifestation in a very simple way. They're told, just think positively or positively, visualize what you want, act as if, raise your vibration. And while mindset absolutely matters, that's only part of the process. Manifestation is not magic in the way people often present it. It's not about wishing for something once and expecting reality to arrange it instantly. Manifestation is the result of repeated internal patterns influencing your perception, emotional state, behavior, and decisions over time. Your thoughts influence your emotions. Your emotions influence your state. Your state influences your actions, and your actions influence the reality you consistently create and experience. So manifestation is not only about attraction, it's also about alignment. Because what you can consciously desire and what you subconsciously expect, they need to move in the same direction. Otherwise, you create internal contradictions, and internal contradictions create inconsistency. You may consciously say, I want success, but subconsciously associate success with pressure, criticism, isolation, or losing yourself. You may consciously say, I want love, but subconsciously expect disappointment, abandonment, instability, or emotional pain. You may consciously say, I want abundance, but subconsciously carry beliefs connected to guilt, scarcity, unworthiness, or fear of visibility. And when those deeper patterns exist, they influence your behavior automatically, not because you're trying to sabotage yourself, but because your subconscious is trying to maintain what feels emotionally familiar. That's important to understand. Your nervous system prioritizes familiarity before expansion, even if familiarity is limiting. Because familiarity feels predictable. How I say that word is ridiculous, but let's keep rocking. When you try to move towards something new, something larger, something unfamiliar, your subconscious patterns often activate doubt, fear, overthinking, avoidance, self sabotage, and emotional inconsistency. People often mistake those experiences as signs that manifestation isn't working. But what's actually happening is deeper patterns are surfacing. The shadow is being activated because manifestation naturally exposes unconscious resistance. Anything within you that does not fully align with the direction you're trying to move eventually reveals itself. And this is why people can temporarily feel aligned, excited, and motivated, only to suddenly feel blocked later. It's not because the desire disappeared, it's because unresolved patterns surfaced underneath it. And shadow work helps you become more aware of those patterns instead of being unconsciously controlled by them. Because once something becomes conscious, you can work with it intentionally. You can recognize this fear isn't random, this hesitation has history behind it, this emotional reaction connects to something deeper. And that changes everything. Because now you stop forcing positivity on top of unresolved emotions. You stop pretending certain fears don't exist. You stop bypassing the internal work required for real alignment, and instead, you begin integrating the parts of yourself that are creating contradictions. That's what alignment actually is. Not perfection, not constant positivity, but internal consistency. A state where your conscious desires and conscious patterns are no longer moving in opposite directions. And when that begins happening, your behavior changes naturally. You become more decisive, more clear, more consistent. You stop pulling away from opportunities you actually want. You stop repeating the same emotional cycles unconsciously. You stop reacting from fear as often, because now your internal state supports your direction instead of resisting it. And this is why shadow work becomes foundational to manifestation, because your shadow contains the beliefs, fears, emotional associations, and identity patterns shaping your reality underneath the surface. Not because your shadow is bad, but because anything unconscious influences you automatically. And manifestation becomes much more powerful when your awareness deepens, because now you're no longer only focused on outcomes. You're focused on understanding the internal patterns influencing those outcomes, and that creates real change. Not temporary excitement, not emotional highs that disappear after a few days, but sustainable shifts in perception, behavior, and identity. And identity is one of the deepest parts of manifestation, because people rarely create beyond what they subconsciously believe fits who they are. Your identity influences what feels believable, what feels safe, what feels possible, and if your identity still carries unresolved fears, shame, limitation, or emotional conditioning, you'll often unconsciously pull yourself back toward familiar states, even while consciously trying to move forward. So manifestation is not simple. It's not simply about attracting more. It's about becoming internally aligned with what you're trying to create. And shadow work is what allows that alignment to happen, because it reveals the hidden resistance underneath your desires. And once you can see that resistance clearly, you stop fighting yourself. You start understanding yourself. And from that place, real transition begins, because now you're not just visualizing a different reality. You become aware of the internal patterns shaping the current ones. And awareness is where manifestation actually starts becoming intentional. So once you understand that manifestation is connected to alignment, the next thing is to realize your subconscious patterns are influencing your reality constantly, not occasionally, not only during emotional moments, but constantly. Because the beliefs, emotional associations, and identity patterns you carry underneath your awareness affects how you think, feel, interpret situations, and behave every single day. And over time, those patterns create repetition, not because life is punishing you, but because unconscious patterns naturally recreate familiar experiences. This is why people often find themselves repeating the same emotional cycles in different forms, different relationships, different jobs, different environments with similar feelings, similar outcomes, similar frustrations. And eventually they start wondering, why does this keep happening? And usually the answer is deeper than the surface of the situation itself, because what you expect emotionally often shapes what you tolerate, pursue, avoid, or unconsciously recreate. And this shows up in every area of life: relationships, money, success, self-worth, visibility, connection, security. The patterns may look different externally, but internally, they often follow the same emotional blueprint. For example, someone may consciously desire healthy love, but subconsciously associate love with inconsistency, emotional distance, unpredictability, or abandonment. So even when healthier opportunities appear, they may unconsciously feel familiar, less emotionally intense, less magnetic, because the nervous system often mistakes emotional familiarity for compatibility. And without awareness, people can unconsciously gravitate toward what emotionally matches old patterns, not because they want pain, but because the patterns feel known. The same thing happens with success. Someone may consciously want expansion, recognition, or visibility, but subconsciously associate visibility with judgment, pressure, criticism, rejection, or loss of safety. So the moment opportunities begin to appear, fear surfaces, overthinking increases, procrastination appears, self-sabotage begins quickly or quietly, not because they lack ability, but because part of their subconscious still perceives expansion as unsafe. And this happens with abundance too. Many people consciously desire financial growth, but subconsciously carry emotional conditioning connected to scarcity, guilt, fear, instability, or unworthiness. So even when opportunities arise, their decisions may still be shaped by fear of loss, of receiving, of becoming visible, fear of outgrowing familiar environments, and all of that influences behavior, which influences the outcome. And this is why manifestation is not just about internal techniques. It's about understanding the emotional patterns shaping your state underneath the surface. And because your state affects your perception, and your perception affects what you notice, pursue, avoid, or believe is possible, people often think that manifestation also happens through repetition. But manifestation, through unconscious emotional habits, through repeated behaviors that continue reinforcing the same outcome. And once you start recognizing this, you begin to see how deeply connected shadow work and manifestation really are. Because shadow work reveals the emotional blueprint operating underneath your conscious desires. For instance, when people say, I feel blocked, or if you're trying to manifest and you don't know what blocks are, you don't feel blocks, you don't know anything about shadow work, you're high vibration and you lack high vibrational terms. But your manifestations may not be working as easily as you perceive they should, or others in your environment, or you're just not getting where you want as fast. That's where, okay, well, why aren't you receiving it? Because manifestation, desire, going after what you want, it sounds easy enough. You're doing the work. You keep your mind on it. You have the vision boards. You believe in it. It's important to you, but it's just not happening. That's when we ask, what's blocking me? What's stopping me? What can I change? And that is what I consider shadow work. You stop experiencing them as individual forces controlling your life. Once these things are revealed, like what you fear, what you avoid, what you expect, what feels emotionally safe, what identity patterns can you or are you still carrying? I like to journal these things, and you don't have to purchase something or have a coach to do these things daily yourself, but they are available on my website. Link in bio. Keeping a journal or just writing down these questions and jotting your answers could be very favorable to understanding so that you can bring them up, through the surface. If they're subconsciously, you got it in the back of your mind. Sometimes we feel like we know it all, and we're working on it. I think sitting down with it, bringing it to life, putting it on paper, kind of gives you the problem so that you can write that solution underneath it, and you can live out the solution like you've been, living out the problem. I think those are like pretty realistic, mind massaging steps versus trying to, because I've done it. So I'm not saying that you're doing it. I'm not projecting, but I have told Spirit, I want to focus on positive things. I want to focus on moving forward. I want to focus on what I want. All that heavy, darker stuff, we've already done that, or I just didn't feel that it was necessary. But, a wise person told me, you can have anything you want. Unless something's stopping you, or you subconsciously have a belief system that interferes with the process you're trying to participate in. If you don't think anything is possible and you feel we have a destiny or a fate and things don't just fall out of the sky, or it's in your natal chart, it's luck, it's the devil, people like saying that, then subconsciously, baby, you don't have a belief system or an algorithm that supports you winning consistently. Because some people grew up in environments and have a perspective that there's always something, and that something negative is more likely to happen before something positive. Shadow work brings those type of conversations to the surface, because we're not all gurus here. Me and you and I, we may know that it's always something. Being around older people who say that or believe that or feel that or act that out subconsciously creates patterns in their descendants. Some of us know that, but there are some people coming into manifestation, shadow work, spirituality, or YouTube videos that don't see that as, oh, is that a part of conditioning, or don't even know what conditioning is. So I will admit, through this conversation, I haven't done like the 101. This is like partially general and almost advanced, because we're talking about shadow work and how to process things, but some of us could need more coaching or help or time with what are the things we're processing, and how do I know like that's something to process, because that's normal. Everybody does it. Everybody thinks it. It's reality. It's realistic. How am I expected to wake up one day and say, that's my problem? That's blocking me. Your blocks are blocking me. You look at your parents, or elders, or, community people, and say, you're blocking me. You are the reason. All that stuff you said, your thoughts, seeing you struggle every day and not aim for more, or it seems like you just laid on your sword. Some things subconsciously are a part of people in their environment, and those things become blocks, and those blocks become why we don't have the same expectations or hustle about ourselves that somebody else with the same 24 hours in a day has. So that's something to consider. And we'll touch on those key points. Like any of you that are interested in, like, let's start with the baby steps of examples so I can know what to dig deep down into myself and figure out. We can talk about it. especially when it comes to triggers. When I went over the part that discussed overreacting, none of us feel like we're overreacting in the moment of overreacting, but somebody outside of us sees it. And are we going to calm down all the time or anytime at any point and rationalize and see where they're coming from? Probably not. But if you're sitting in the audience today and you can recall a moment like that, where someone felt you were overreacting or just didn't see why something was so important to you or what warranted your expression, start there. What just pissed you off? You flipped out and they didn't think it was that serious. It could have been getting cheated on, being late for a party, missing an engagement, not calling back, not texting fast enough. Some things that, no disrespect, but kind of make you crazy. That just really grind your gears. It could be in any demographic. It doesn't have to be in relationships. Things that irritate you about the people in your household, about family members, coworkers, about life. Some things that are just super sensitive to you deep down inside that you could see on TV or in a movie. Those are all things that could help you understand yourself, help you understand what blocks are, and when self-sabotage appears. You'll notice an underlying pattern instead of only judging the behavior. When emotional triggers arise, you start asking, what belief is beneath this? What expectation is shaping this reaction? What part of me still associates expansion with danger? And those questions become changing. Those questions will begin changing your awareness. Because now you're no longer only focused on changing the external results. You're focused on understanding the internal blueprint, creating repetition. And once that blueprint changes, that's how you break chains, break cycles, break curses, just break repetitive outcomes, generational limitations. Your reality naturally begins shifting with it, not because you force the universe to respond, but because your state, your behavior, your decisions, and identity begin operating differently. And I, remind you, those that are listening, when I say your state, it's like your mood, like how are you showing up in this moment, mentally, emotionally, psychologically. And identity is deeply important here because people tend to create within the limits of who they are subconsciously, who they believe themselves to be. If someone subconsciously identifies with struggle, they may unconsciously create struggle. And these are the type of conversations that kind of separate everyday people from mystics, empaths, starseeds, spiritual beings, religious leaders, counselors, psychologists. We would look into the deeper meaning of things. But I can resonate with logical, everyday, civilized folk saying, what does it have to do with the price of tea in China? And how did I bring these struggles upon myself? It's kind of like a conundrum of what came first, the chicken or the egg. But I believe in the law of attraction. And anyone that's interested in manifesting, healing, shadow work, or soul growth does as well. And if we believe in formulas for one instance, it automatically generates that formula to be applicable in another, like this. So yes, if you associate life with struggle, because many normal people do from all walks of life and any income background. I have a friend or an associate, because I don't know this man, but he seems to be pretty well off. He's very attractive. He's having his way in life. He's still grumpy pants. All he talks about is having a hard time, and it's always something. And I don't like how he greets life. I didn't like how he greeted me. So that's why I call him an associate and not a friend, because I don't know him and he blocked. But every time I'd see him, you go to a person, you pass by and you say, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Oh, shit. Trying to still, that I'm like, oh damn, every day, and I'm not trying to be judgy. I'm not on a high horse. This man probably got more than I have. It ain't about that. I'm not like weighing up materials, but it's just like he's used to that. I can tell the elders, in his childhood, men probably talk like that. A grandparent talk like that. Mother talk like that. So he just thinks that it's bonding. It's how you communicate. It's relatable or even humble, because I know he got a foreign car, a 2-story house, and a pool in the back. But he greets people with just trying to stay above water. Man, it's hard, man. I can't even explain it because I don't, I'm trying to like embody a grumpy dude and I'm struggling with it. But I hope that makes some sense. Subconsciously identifying with struggle, I'll say again, could unconsciously create struggle. So keep that in mind. What you associate with and think is normal, true, acceptable, or going to happen is part of your manifestation. So you can't think like that. And I'm going to say can't, because some people like, I can do whatever I want. You don't know. I can pray to God. Jesus cover me in the blood. That's great. But I'm telling you, you can't be a negative person or super real and then also try to manifest or change something with that same attitude, not feeling like it needs adjustment. You're manifesting on one side, but thinking it's always something on the other, which is why you want to manifest, by the way. You're tired of it, or just want to be safer, want a softer life, or the people that you watch on TV, or somebody at your job. You want better because, you want to flex on your ex, whatever the case may be. This is why shadow work is important. And sometimes it's a taboo conversation where manifesting in abundance and positive affirmation seems like more productive, more commercial, more upbeat, more easily accepted. It's the bright side. But you cannot have any of those things with mud in your water. Okay? If someone subconsciously identifies with instability, they may unconsciously feel uncomfortable inside consistency. This is self-sabotage. And until those identity patterns are conscious, they become influencing reality automatically. That's why shadow work is not separate from manifestation. It's foundational to it, because manifestation without self-awareness often becomes temporary. Because manifestation built on awareness creates consistency. Because now your conscious goals and subconscious patterns begin moving together instead of against each other. And that changes how you experience everything. Because once internal resistance starts dissolving, opportunities feel different, decisions feel different, your confidence feels different, your emotion, your reactions shifts. Your sense of possibility expands, and reality begins responding differently because you are responding differently. Not from forced positivity, but from deep alignment. That's where manifestation starts becoming real. Not a fantasy, not an escape, but as the real natural nature, results of internal transformation becoming external behavior. And I'd like to point that out, because fantasy, delusional, escapism, disassociation, all of those things are terms with definitions that do make sense and are real. You can also, I feel, do some of those things in the process of shadow work or manifestation. Does that change anything? No. If someone were to say, oh, you disassociate because I'm distant, or I'm walking away from things that no longer serve me, or I'm tearing down, my environmental conditioning that was a part of who I was. Am I going to combat disassociation? Am I going to be in denial? Am I going to disagree with it? No. I appreciate your feedback. I'll keep that in consideration. But this is a part of the process that I'm taking right now. So I just like to throw that out there as a piece of advice. Sometimes in your journey, when you go through things, sometimes when, people say that they're going through spiritual awakenings, there's sometimes manic episodes. I'm not gonna lie. You have to do what's best for you. And if something, looks like a duck and acts like a duck, it might be a duck. But if I need to be a duck to get to the other side of the pond, then I'm quacking. I don't give a fuck. So keep that in mind. Once you begin understanding how subconscious patterns shape your reality, the next thing you'll notice is this. The moment you genuinely start moving toward growth, expansion, love, success, abundance, or change, resistance often appears, like you get cold feet type deal. Or you think, this feels good, it's nice, it's working, but so there's that but. If I'm aligned, shouldn't everything feel easy is what happens. Especially when you've done everything that we've talked about tonight. You've already been there, you've already done that. You're at an advanced level. And good has happened. But some things returned. Some feelings returned. Some patterns returned. And you feel like, shouldn't it be easier? If I'm chosen, shouldn't it be easier? If I'm connected to source, shouldn't it be easier? But alignment doesn't mean unconscious patterns disappear immediately. In fact, growth often reveals the exact patterns that still need awareness. Because the moment you begin stepping towards something unfamiliar, anything within you that feels unsafe around that change starts surfacing. Fear, doubt, overthinking, emotional inconsistency, avoidance, self-sabotage, not because you're failing, but because unresolved patterns are being activated. And this is where shadow work becomes essential, because without awareness, people mistake resistance as a sign to stop. They think, maybe this isn't for me. Oh my gosh. You don't know how often I've heard that or that it happens. And I had to learn. Like, I think God came from the multiverse and pulled me to the side, because I thought it was just like my life purpose to get people to see things that I could. Whether it's the gift of discernment or some sort of telepathic kinesis. I could see inside of people and through things. And I would just be the advocate for change, abundance, manifestation, and not giving up. And I would pick the most low vibrational people to try to sit and pull a light out of. And the first thing, or the most often thing I heard was, if it's meant for me, it'll just do it. Maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not capable. Maybe I'm not aligned. What the Lord want me to have, and I'm just like, don't forget, free will is the only thing that you have that is yours and only yours outside of fingerprints. So when you say what the good Lord want, or what the universe give, or you just humble servant, submissive being, the only thing you have outside of fingerprints that's non-identical and only belongs to you is free will. Okay? Just don't want you to forget that. What often happens is, what's really happening, a deeper conditioning and surfacing into awareness. So like when you think everything is good and then something pops up. I've heard it in people getting back out into the dating scene. They thought they was good. They thought they were over something, that a behavior was dealt with, that the past had gone away, that their triggers and traumas have been resolved. But it's like you were by yourself. You were in hermit mode. You weren't in an environment that could have been triggering. You wasn't doing something that once triggered you. So once you step back out there, or something goes right for the first time, there could be deeper conditioning. And no, healing shouldn't take forever. I don't think we heal until we die. But do set the expectation that it could be a process. And I ask people to be patient with that for no other reason outside of genetic conditioning, genetic DNA. Your blood has memories in it. Your mind has memories in it. And if you believe in reincarnation, then your heart has information in it. But you don't have to be into spirituality or mysticism or nothing crazy. Science, biology has proven that data is stored in DNA. That's why they ask you about family history when you go to the doctor. And so I'm saying all this to say, be patient and be positive, because you may not just be overcoming yourself when you go through these reconditionings, when you go through shadow work, when you go through reprogramming and rewiring. We're talking about what could be conditioning over a culture, So you beating yourself up because you trying to manifest some magazine ass life before you die, and it's frustrating you because you really want to experience it, you want to see it, you want it to hurry up. I can tell you a faster way, but it's not as psychologically and emotionally fulfilling, I don't think. And most people that get into shadow work and manifestation are feelers and psychologists and therapists and coaches and just really, humans. But hypnosis therapy and rewiring your neurological system is less psychological and less emotional. Meditation, sound waves, and when you get into, there are some advanced things that aren't as, I guess, psychologically and emotionally straining. And I like that way. I took the emotional route, so I know what it looked like. I know what I'm talking about. I can help you with it. But some people who just do it so long, and maybe it's not your strength, maybe it feel like walking in circles. It just feel like bringing it up, talking about it, looking forward, dealing with it again. All that stuff just seemed like a lot of work, emotional and inconsistent. Yeah, you look into reprogramming with other tools like light, sound, and hypnotherapy. If you just get tired of the emotional, psychological journaling and repetitive chants or whatnot. Something for everybody. But shadow work, situations, resistance, fear. It reveals where unconscious fear still exists when these things come up to the surface. It reveals where your identity still feels conflicted. You can go from one tax bracket to another and get exactly what you want. Then being around those people, because you didn't surpass your peers, back home, and you feeling good, flexing. But then now you got to deal with that environment and being new to it. So have you considered, or would you consider old patterns, feelings, perspectives coming up then? Like, how do I handle that? So that's what I mean by, just because you step up a level, it doesn't mean that the work is done. And I'm not saying that will happen to you. I'm just saying that it could. That you get out of one situation, your manifestation works, and you put yourself in another situation. There could be other things there, other shadows there, other aspects of you that you hadn't anticipated because you ain't been in those rooms. You haven't been in that environment. So keep that in mind. Keep your head up. But sometimes resistance looks like procrastination. You know what you want to do, but you keep delaying it. Not because you're lazy, but because part of you feels unsafe moving forward. Sometimes resistance looks like perfectionism. You overanalyze, you over-prepare, you wait for the right moment, because perfection creates the illusion of safety. Sometimes resistance looks like emotional inconsistency. One day you feel confident and aligned. The next day you feel doubtful and withdrawn. because your subconscious is moving between expansion and familiarity. Sometimes resistance looks like self-sabotage. You move towards something you want, then unconsciously create behaviors that pull you away from it. You shut down, disappear, you avoid opportunities, or question yourself, and afterwards you may not fully understand why, but underneath it, there's usually fear of visibility, fear of change, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of judgment, fear of outgrowing old identities or environments. And shadow work helps bring those fears into awareness instead of allowing them to quietly control your behavior. Because once something unconscious becomes conscious, it loses some of its control over you. You begin recognizing the pattern while it's happening. You start noticing the reaction feels familiar. The fear is connected to something deeper. This hesitation isn't random, and awareness creates space. Space between the trigger and the response. Space between the fear and the decision. Space between the subconscious pattern and your conscious choice. And that space changes everything, because now you're no longer reacting automatically. You're observing what happens internally, and observation interrupts unconscious repetition. This is why shadow work is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming aware enough that unconscious patterns stop running your life without your permission. And one of the biggest shifts happens when you stop judging the resistance. Because many people become frustrated with themselves when fear resurfaces. They think, I should be beyond this. I thought I healed this already. Why is this still coming up? But healing isn't linear, and deeper patterns often surface in layers, especially when you're moving into larger levels of growth or visibility. Because every level often activates new layers of identity, fear, and conditioning. And that's normal. The goal is not to never feel resistance. The goal is to recognize resistance without immediately obeying it or denying it. That's the shift. That's also why we do these videos, because there's levels to everything, and maybe one day we'll do a video that puts them all together, because we're talking about shadow work tonight, and it is connected to manifesting. But also, we just reached a part of the conversation where authenticity is like first step before you can even get to shadow work, because you have to be honest with yourself. You have to be broken down enough, tired enough, or hungry enough where somebody says, hey man, you got to be honest. Like some things that you don't want to admit, some things that you consciously or subconsciously deny, some things that could trigger you, some things that you take to your grave and be stubborn about. You do know that those things are required to be not even healed, but dealt with, because everything ain't got to be healing. Like, oh my God, y'all want to heal left and heal right and heal this and heal that. But if it's not a sore, it don't have to be healed. We're just psychologically, intelligently, practically talking about things that need to be rearranged or removed. They don't have to be healing. That's just common sense. You lying to yourself or not being true to you about yourself. How you gonna fix something? You're gonna manifest from a place of cap. That could be why manifestation don't work. And I can't see who I'm talking to tonight, so don't feel attacked. And hopefully I'm not even talking to you, but just one or two people may creep up in here with us and they need to hear it. But I want to stress how important that is, not only because I had to deal with it myself, but because as a practitioner, I can strongly suggest that it is necessary. And if you can't do that, you can just give all this shit up. If you cannot be honest with yourself, if you have found no validity in the things that you've been called, the things that captured your relationships, the egregious observations, you've been given from people closest to you, if you think it's just all lies and you ain't done none of that and ain't none of that you can just get the fuck off this video because it ain't gonna work. It's just like most religious documents state, or most spiritual, the most ancient of cultures would agree with me. You have to have a pure heart. You got to be real. You know what I mean? And they're not gonna say that. I ain't never heard it. You're gonna learn that at no university. I haven't seen it in the textbooks or a lot of high-end philosophers and shit. I ain't heard nobody say that because maybe it's expected, but I think that's definitely something that should be shared and brought to awareness, because it's not to be expected. You know how many delusional people walking around their own problem and would never admit that? And what if they stumble over into our community talking about shadow work and healing from other people with no accountability for why it was in alignment with their life? So I'm a realistic coach, and I'm not going to play with you. If you cannot be honest with yourself and see no faults or no flaws that you can personally identify with that have cost you relationships or opportunities, you're kidding yourself to think you're just going to go into some spiritual space and start, wearing chakra t-shirts and saying mantras and it's going to work for you. All right? Stop being controlled by unconscious patterns. And over time, the intensity decreases. The awareness increases. Your nervous system gradually begins associating growth with safety instead of danger. That's important because manifestation is deeply connected to what your system believes is safe to experience consistently, not just what sounds good consciously. And shadow work helps create that internal safety by exposing the hidden fears underneath your desires. Not the shame, not to suppress them, but to understand them. Because understanding transforms your relationship with fear. You stop seeing fear as proof you can't move forward and start seeing it as proof that something unfamiliar is happening. And when you approach resistance with awareness instead of avoidance, something powerful happens. The same patterns that once stopped you become opportunities for deeper understanding. The same fears that once controlled your decisions become invisible or visible enough to work through intentionally. And that's where real alignment begins, because now you're no longer forcing manifestation externally. You're removing the internal patterns that were interfering with it. And once that process begins, your reality shift starts in a much sustainable way, not from temporary motivation, but from internal transformation. It starts in the mind. You know what I mean? And that's why I say you got to have a pure heart. It is not outside of you. It is not, I need to wash my parents off. I need to wash this conditioning off. I need to wash off society. I need to wash off religion. Some of those things are true, and all of those things could be true. But you were you before your relationships began with these people. So that fate, your life, may have already been written in the stars. When you were conceived and you were born and you have a natal chart and what the planets and the stars and the sky was doing the day you were born also contributes to what you will experience. And with that being said, how is it, or could it be 100% or even 50% somebody else's fault when your natal chart, before you even became of age to know what a natal chart was, I can read it right now. And what it says today, it said in 1972, it said in 1987, it said in 96, it said This person would have complicated relationships. This person would, have issues with siblings. This person could experience abandonment or the loss of a parent at early age. Da, 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 da. That being said, it's not always something outside of us that we're experiencing that we need to heal and wash off of us. Some things that we align with or experience were just behaviors of the ingredients we're created from. And if you don't sit in spaces, read books, watch movies, listen to podcasts that discuss those kind of things, then of course you're going to resonate and be sitting up trauma bonding with people who stuck on healing. But I like intelligence. I like results. And I like success. I like for things to work. I want to see manifestation happen in real time. But I want to do it in a way that is healing, that is soft, that's not aggressive, that's not competitive, that I didn't have to earn, right? Because if I just want to grind to the gristle and hustle, you earn those things. That's not manifesting. You bust your ass for it. You sacrifice relationships for it, time for it, your sleep for it. That's not manifesting. Manifesting is a soft life. I'm not losing sleep. I'm not swallowing my pride to get through this job and get a promotion even though my boss belittles me. That's not manifesting. You sacrifice something for that. Manifesting is not sacrificing anything but lower aspects of yourself. That's all I got to give up. I can't give up nothing else. I'm not giving up being an involved parent. I'm not giving up being a lover if I choose to be in a relationship. I'm not giving up anything favorable that ain't done nothing wrong. I'm not turning my back on love. I'm not turning my back on rest. I'm not turning my back on day naps. So I don't want to work hard. I'm not grinding to the gristle and I ain't sacrificing shit. So tell me about the law of attraction. Now we get to a part where everything becomes practical. Because understanding the shadow is one thing, but working with it in real time while you're actually trying to manifest something in your life, that's transformation. And it begins to hold. Because manifestation doesn't fall apart in theory. It falls apart in moments. It falls apart in fear, doubt, moments where I said this yesterday. If you listen to the previous discussion we had, we're manifesting in the present moment all the time. The past does not exist. It is a word that is a placeholder for our memories. The future also does not exist. Because it ain't came yet, we can't go to it. I mean, most of us can't. That's your fucking time marker. But it's not something physical that I can touch and experience, and it don't exist for real. It's an illusion. The only time that we ever have is the present moment. That is where you manifest from. So it's a good thing that we all in here tonight, and some of you are working on change, or this morning, depending on where you are in the world. You working to create a better future. That starts today. It does not start next week. It don't start when you lose the weight. I'm gonna look for a relationship when I feel better. It doesn't start when you get that job. It doesn't start when I'm gonna break up with them when it's more convenient, at the right time. It starts right now. It always starts in the now. So not to scare you, not to be negative, not to be rough, not to be rude, just to be honest and try to open up new perspectives. Some of you guys already know these things. But how you feel all day. So let's focus on now. I don't care how you felt yesterday, but I will remind you, however you felt yesterday did manifest some things that happened today. And just to be real with you, some things that you felt yesterday may manifest as some shit for another day. If you don't have present awareness to pull it back in, to take back control. So I could have had anxiety, fears, doubt, negativities, self-sabotage, just all kind of things. 2 days ago, 3 days ago, last week, half of my life. But in this present moment, it's stronger than the past. It's stronger than the future that hasn't happened yet. And I want to have some sort of influence on it. I want to do over. If my past behaviors, thoughts, emotions, actions has something to do with what's going on today, then I want to get back in the driver's seat and modify my thoughts, actions, behaviors, and patterns today, so that if tomorrow exists, it's going to be a reflection of this moment. And I promise you, you'll start having better moments if you consciously say, right now, I'm going to create better moments. Because I don't recommend you bring up the past or stay in the past unless it's beneficial, so you can remind yourself you may have experienced some horrible days because of some horrible feelings that repeated or duplicated, because we talked about that. So it's like you have to listen to me a lot. If you don't follow me, probably follow me so you can keep up with what we're talking about. But patterns are real. Repeating is inevitable. That's why you have a birthday every so many days, years. We got the same holidays. These seasons repeat. We got 4 seasons. Repeating is inevitable. You can get in the driver's seat and have more control over what repeats for you. But you have to consciously do that. So I had to back up and tell you why it's important to say, right now in this moment, I'm going to take some control and just create some positive shit in case I wake up tomorrow. I'm creating positive moments right now for tomorrow, because all we have is right now. And this lady said that my past actions in the now created the bullshit I experienced 2 days later, a year later. I influenced that some because I was afraid of something. I doubted something. I was yeah? But if the present is the most potent moment, I don't have any fears that my attitude yesterday created some bullshit that could come up this weekend. I'm in the present moment right now where I can modify the future that was supposed to happen. And if that sounds mind-boggling or like I'm just rambling some bullshit, I understand it. I totally get where you're coming from. But other people, if you want to try it out, because what the fuck is it gonna hurt? Come back and tell us about it. Your subconscious patterns, they show themselves instantly. So the real question becomes, what do you do when that happens? The first step is awareness. At the exact moment of activation, not after, not later when you're reflecting. Because, we overthink and we reflect all day long, especially if you're an air sign. I've been being real on schedule tonight. If y'all noticed, I know some of y'all are proud of me. But overthinking and overanalyzing the past, what do you do with that other than refill it or try to see what you did wrong or wish you could have said more? Do that in the moment. That helps save relationships. That could have helped you not have regrets. Analyze what is happening in the moment instead of reflecting later. It could be beneficial. I can't tell you what to do. It may not even be easy to do, but I'm just going to put it in your back pocket today to try it. You could notice the shift. When you don't do that and you just reflect on it later, that's where you tense up. That's where you change your mood. That's where your emotions change. Instead of immediately dealing with the reaction, you recognize it activates something later. That creates separation between what happened, and you and how you're feeling. You no longer fully inside of the reaction. You're observing it happening. And the second step is naming the state of judgment, or naming the mood, naming that experience without judgment. Don't fight it. Don't analyze it. Just simply identify it and say, that's one of my fears. That's one of my doubts. I was avoiding that, or I'm uncertain about this. And call it out, because you can. And then you'll begin to see it clearly. The third step is slowing down the internal momentum. because most unconscious patterns rely on speed, fast thinking, fast reacting, fast emotional escalation. So you interrupt that speed even slightly. You pause, you breathe, you create just enough space for awareness to stay present, not to eliminate the feeling, but to prevent automatic reaction. The fourth step is locating the deeper pattern underneath it. You ask internally, what is this connected to? What does this remind me of? What is my system interpreting this as? You don't force the answer. You just allow associations to surface, because often the surface emotion is not the root. The fear of visibility may be tied to past judgment. The fear of success may be tied to pressure of expectations. The fear of rejection may be tied to earlier emotional experiences. And when you begin seeing those connections, the reactions stop feeling random. And I understand people who can't even connect those dots, because I know through past life regression that some of these things are reincarnated issues. So just imagine that you're blocked or suffering from something that you were born with. You have fears, doubts, wounds that nobody in this lifetime put there. But you don't know that. You don't even know that exists. You're just repeating life again, or on the opposite side of the fence. Like if you were a parent that died with regrets and had, a bad relationship with your children, then you reincarnate as a child, retaliating on a parent. You know what I mean? That exists, whether you believe it or not, and sometimes affects people in this life, which is why some things just don't make sense. Like being born and having a relationship with somebody and y'all just never liked each other, and you can't understand for the life of you why, like, you, this parent, you, this person, you, this sibling had just never gotten along, and you burn them up inside for no reason. Things like that are also affecting us. And like I said, does that hinder people from manifesting and moving forward? Not always, because they're not emotional, empathic, psychologically stimulated. They busy, taking action and not overwhelmed or held back. But some conscious beings, which are normally spiritual folk, you got all this conscious weight because you overthink things, you figure things out, you see things differently, you feel things deeply, and you can't move past it. So we're having these conversations for people that are wanting to move past something or above something. Random folks that just come into our spaces, don't know what we're talking about. Right? I don't speak for the entire planet. I do say that these are ways to offset, work through, or understand human behavior. But am I aware that not all humans go through these instances? Absolutely. Because all humans aren't wired the same. And I'm talking to a particular collective of individuals that may have similar discrepancies. Okay? It's crucial. This fifth step, separating identity from the pattern. Because without awareness, people say things like, I always do that. This is just how I am. I can't help it. But in real time shadow work, you shift that framing. Instead of identifying with the pattern, you observe it as something happening within you, not as your identity, but as a conditioned response. And that separation creates flexibility, because now you no longer the reaction. You are the awareness noticing the reaction. And the sixth step is choosing alignment instead of impulse. This is where manifestation begins to stabilize, because you now are in a moment where the two forces exist at the same time: subconscious impulse and conscious awareness. And instead of automatically following the impulse, you pause long enough to choose differently. Now, from suppression, or not from suppression, but from clarity. What would I choose if I wasn't operating from fear right now? What action aligns with what I actually want? This is like my favorite part, I promise you. Like, this helps so much in the current moment to shift from the part of you that holds you back to the part of you that is more ambitious, more successful, happier, more confident, because you're being honest with yourself and saying, if whatever is blocking me wasn't there, and of course this comes with awareness, you have to be aware of it to ask yourself that, I think. So if these fears, if these blocks, if these restrictions weren't the problem, if my financial awareness wasn't a problem, or whatever my insecurities are when it comes to dealing with relationships, if that wasn't the problem, if I wasn't in survival mode, forcing myself to work, overdoing things, over what do they call it, people pleasing, and you just going hard, right? Because you fear failure, you fear something. And if you sit back and ask yourself, what would I be doing right now if I didn't have those fears? If I didn't think, I needed to nonstop be on goal, or whatever people doing out there. If you didn't have that, what choice would you make differently? What action aligns with what you actually want? And that question brings you back into direction. The 7th step is integrating after the moment passes, because shadow work doesn't end in the moment you're aware of it. It continues afterwards. You reflect, not to criticize yourself, but to understand the pattern more deeply. What triggered me? What belief showed up? What did I learn about myself in that moment? And over time, this reflection builds familiarity with your patterns. And it also removes confusion, because what was once automatic becomes recognizable, and what becomes recognizable becomes workable. And this is where manifestation starts shifting in a very real way, because now you're no longer just setting intentions or visualizing outcomes or trying to stay positive. You're actively interrupting the unconscious pattern that used to redirect your behavior away from your intentions. And that changes consistency, because manifestation is not about one moment of clarity. It's about repeated alignment. And each time you interrupt the shadow pattern, you create more alignment.